Hello! In this video, we're going to take a look at the Ethiopian unique technology for the Imperial Age, which is Torsion Engines. Torsion Engines increases the blast radius on your Siege Workshop units, but how good is it, and is it worth the 1000 food and 600 gold that it costs to research? The first unit I looked at was the Siege Onager. I used a group of archers arranged in a square with 500 HP so that they didn't die from the Onager shot, and then I marked down how much damage the Onager did to each of those archers. I did this for an Onager with Torsion Engines, and I did it for one without so that we could compare the results. On your screen right now, you can see the results from those tests, and you can see that the Torsion Engines clearly gives a lot more damage output. Not just in terms of the number of units that it hits, but also in terms of the amount of damage done to the units that were hit by both Siege Onagers. One thing that's quite interesting here is that the damage is not even around the center unit that is targeted. It's kind of weighted towards the side that is closer to where the Siege Onager fired from, and I can only assume that this is to do with the direction that the projectile is traveling in. I kind of imagine the Siege Onager rocks kind of flopping onto the enemy a little bit like a pancake. Now when you consider that Torsion Engines costs 450 less food and 400 less gold than simply upgrading to the Siege Onager, it certainly seems to make a huge amount of sense to invest in this technology when you can afford it. So one question that came to my mind is that, since Torsion Engines is so much cheaper than the Siege Onager upgrade, would it be better to get Torsion Engines before Siege Onager? To find this out, I ran another experiment. I looked at the total damage for a single Onager, and then I compared that to a Siege Onager without Torsion Engines and an Onager with Torsion Engines, to see which gave the best value for money. The Onager with Torsion Engines does 81 more damage than the Onager without any upgrades. The Siege Onager does 133 more damage than the Onager without any upgrades. So as you can see, the Siege Onager does quite a bit of additional damage. But what we have to do is look at the cost of the technologies and figure out how much value for money you're actually getting. The total cost for the Torsion Engines technology is 1,600 resources, and the total cost for Siege Onager is 2,450 resources. Now, if we divide the additional damage by the total cost of the technology, we can see how much additional damage we're getting per resource spent. The values here are very close. For the Torsion Engines, you're just getting 0.051 extra damage per resource spent, and for Siege Onager, you're getting 0.054 damage per resource spent. However, that does mean that the Siege Onager costs 53% more than the Torsion Engines technology, but the Siege Onager does 64% more additional damage than Torsion Engines on an Onager. So I would conclude that it is generally better to get the Siege Onager upgrade first, since you're getting more damage output per resource that you spend. We do, however, have to take into consideration a couple of other factors, and they are the other benefits for getting Torsion Engines or getting Siege Onager. If you go with Torsion Engines before Siege Onager, you're going to save yourself 450 food and 400 gold, which is the equivalent of 5 nights. So, if you're under a lot of pressure from the enemy, you may be better off getting those extra military units out rather than spending more resources on Siege Onager. However, if you have lots of resources in the bank in surplus and you can afford to buy that Siege Onager upgrade comfortably, then it's going to be the best choice because it gives you more benefits as well. It also gives you 15 bonus damage versus buildings, an extra 10 HP, and an extra 1 pierce armor when compared to simply having Onagers with Torsion Engines. So far, we've only looked at the Siege Onager, and it's already pretty clear that Torsion Engines is well worth the resources. It does also affect the other Siege Workshop units though, and next up we'll take a look at the RAM to see what kind of difference it makes. This one isn't too difficult, and with a little bit of testing we can see that the blast radius of the ram simply increases by a single tile. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that that's a tile in all directions, that actually increases the damage a ram can do immensely. In fact, the blast radius is so huge that when you're ram rushing down an enemy castle, don't be surprised if a lot of nearby buildings start falling down as well. It's quite ridiculous. At this stage, the words torsion engines are starting to sound very weird, but we must move on and look at the Scorpion. Testing a heavy Scorpion with torsion engines researched shows us that the blast radius isn't really increased by much at all. The archers that are on the tiles next to the archer that was targeted didn't take any damage, which tells us that the blast radius is less than one tile wide. Moving the archers closer to just half a tile distance away, and we can see that even then, the blast radius isn't enough to damage the archers next to the target archer. I'd go as far as to say that there's absolutely no point researching torsion engines if you're only applying it to your heavy Scorpions. It simply doesn't give enough of an increase to make it worthwhile in my opinion. I do, however, really doubt that you're going to be making many Scorpions in a standard game anyway. It seems like an incredibly underused unit, and one that I don't think many people are all too aware of how to use. Finally, I looked at the bombard cannon to see how it would be affected by torsion engines. At first glance, again, it doesn't seem like the bombard cannon benefits too much. The bombard cannon only does a small amount of additional damage adjacent to the target unit. However, since the bombard cannon has such a low blast radius to begin with, I wanted to zoom in and take a look at what would happen when the units are spaced just half a tile apart. Unlike with the Scorpion, you can start to see a very big difference with torsion engines researched. When units are just half a tile away from the targeted unit, the bombard cannon with torsion engines nearly did double the damage of a bombard cannon without. This gives your bombard cannons a huge boost when you're using them to take down your opponent's trebuchets, as it becomes much more likely that you'll be able to kill the enemy villagers that are repairing their trebuchets at the same time. So in conclusion, I would say that torsion engines is well worth the investment. If you're making rams, onagers, or bombard cannons, it's going to massively increase the damage output of your siege. In a situation where you're debating whether to get Siege Onager or Torsion Engines, I would recommend going with Siege Onager rather than going for Torsion Engines, since it does give you slightly better value for money. If you're planning on making Scorpions, sadly Torsion Engines is simply not worth it, but that is the only time I would say you should avoid this research. So long as you've got a big enough economy to afford it, it's going to be worth it every single time. What are your thoughts on this research? Have you got any cool stories where Torsion Engines has really helped you out? Well, if you have, leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like rating. But thank you very much for watching, guys, and hopefully I'll see you next time.